Hello, so I wanted to do a video all about sort of how likely is it that a terrorist attack would involve chemical weapons and explaining why we probably haven't seen as much of it so far. So, obviously in the UK we've had these Novichok incidents, and I think these are really good for highlighting why a chemical weapon attack is kind of hard to pull off. Which is kind of contradictory, because I'm going to say some things that make chemical weapon attacks sound like they'd be an easy terrorist attack, and some that sort of sound like they're going to be a bad, sort of hard to carry out terrorist attack. So what I'll do now is just take the mask off so you can hear me a bit better. Right, there we go. So, what makes chemical weapon attacks hard to carry out? Well, in a sense, making the chemical weapons themselves and the sort of dispersion of the units. Because when people think of how dangerous chemical weapons are, most people would think of World War I, where every major power was producing chemical weapons and dispersion systems for them, and most of the people, who were killed by chemical weapons were in trenches and defensive positions they couldn't really leave. So what would happen is you'd pump chemical weapons across there in massive quantities, made, using proper industries. The people had nowhere to run. If they were lucky, they had masks. If they were unlucky, they didn't. And generally that's why so many people were killed. So obviously, that's what made chemical weapons so deadly in World War I, is obviously, as I just explained, mostly that it was properly manufactured by lots and lots of industry on a big scale and dispersed on a big scale. Now, if a terrorist group was to try and make a chemical weapon and disperse it, firstly they have the problem of making a pure chemical weapon. Now, obviously with chemical weapons, even if they didn't make something pure, it can still be very dangerous and deadly. I'm not sort of trying to say that's not the case. But the point I'm trying to get at is that if they don't make them properly, it won't necessarily have the intended effects. Now, a very good example of this is because this is one the media and lots of people don't actually understand when they talk about nerve agents. They talk about the Tokyo subway attacks carried out by that Japanese cult. And basically that cult tried to make sarin, but they didn't make it properly, and that's why the attacks were nowhere near as deadly as they should have been, like thankfully for obviously everybody involved. Now, about 10 people were killed in that attack, which isn't that many, but I think over 1,000 people, or several thousand people, had to be hospitalised, who had headaches, sort of funny vision, weird salivating problems. So all symptoms of nerve agent poisoning, but not actually, death by nerve agent. And the reason being, they hadn't properly made the sarin. If that was real sarin, the thousands injured would have been thousands dead. You're just in a massive shift in the numbers, because obviously it was very effective at affecting people, but not to actually give them a lethal dose, unlike properly manufactured military chemical weapons. So that's one of the big factors. So if a terrorist group was to try and manufacture chemical weapons, they'd need to know how to do it properly, and thankfully most don't. I assume it's in many ways, and obviously I don't go about building bombs, so I wouldn't know, but I'm assuming that if you were getting fertilisers and all the sort of components for making an explosive bomb, that's a bit easier than chemicals. Now obviously, with chemical weapons, and I won't go into what they are for obvious reasons, there's lots of household chemicals that you can buy that can be turned into very effective chemical weapons. Thankfully, it seems nobody's figured out what these are yet that has ill intent. But even if they did, they'd still have to manufacture them secretly and then be able to disperse them effectively. Because this is another thing, I'm sure you know this, with most terrorist attacks, the ones that get caught are the ones where there's lots more planning involved, lots more people involved, lots more buying of materials for a terrorist attack. So, if there were a group of terrorists and they did lots and lots of planning and were buying lots of fertiliser from everywhere, they were more likely to get caught than if you have a lone wolf terrorist attack where somebody decides to get in a vehicle and run people over, or just get a gun and shoot a load of people, or a knife and stab a load of people. Those sort of terrorist attacks are much harder to stop, because obviously if somebody just goes out and decides to do evil things, very difficult to stop one person doing that, on an intelligence level. But when you've got far more people communicating and buying things that can be traced and everything else, that's when you can get far more of an idea. So on a big scale, a chemical weapon attack for that reason wouldn't really, work. Because of the fact that if you're buying massive quantities of chemicals that you could then, in theory, weaponise, you're far more likely to flag up on some sort of system doing it. And if you have a bigger group of people communicating about it, it's more likely that something's going to get picked up along there, and the plan's going to be intercepted. But obviously that doesn't mean that chemical weapons aren't deadly. If we, like I said, look at World War I, the sheer amount of people killed. in World War One was very high. But the thing is, what you have to understand, as I said with chemical weapons, is they have to be made properly and dispersed properly. And if somebody was just to disperse a chemical weapon in the middle of a busy area, although I think more people would be injured in a stampede running away than injured by the chemical weapon themselves, you know, or the actual chemical itself, personally, because of the fact that obviously in a wide open space a chemical isn't going to be as concentrated, it's going to drift off with the wind and whatever else, it's not as controllable. Whereas, as in World War One, as I said, lots of soldiers in trenches would know where to go, especially with a lot of the chemical weapons being heavier than that, they would sink into the trenches and be very concentrated, and these were pure, properly manufactured chemical weapons, not somebody in their garage mixing some household chemicals together in containers. So, again, that's, you know, the thing. And as we said before, and we always say, somebody, you know, in a car that plows into a crowd of people is going to do far more damage in a lone wolf attack than somebody, you know, trying to come up with some sort of chemical weapon or whatever. It's why a lot of terrorism has shifted from bomb making to actually sort of car attacks and truck attacks. So that's mostly it for this video, but the whole point is you need to be aware that when there's the media stories about often the chemical weapon attacks, they've not really looked into it properly, because I said I'm really sick of when people say, oh, the Tokyo subway attack proved that sarin gas isn't actually an effective chemical weapon. Sarin is incredibly effective if it's manufactured by a military and, you know, dispersed over an urban population in big numbers. It's a weapon of mass destruction. It's a WMD for a reason. But if a cult tries to make sarin, doesn't make it properly, and then tries to distribute it by filling bags with the liquid and then just pouring the liquid onto the floor of subway trains, that's very, very different than, you know, proper manufactured nerve agent. Same with this whole Novichok thing. What I suspect, and I've been attacked by GCHQ for saying this, which makes me think I'm even more correct, is that it was not the Russians manufacturing their super deadly Novichok. It was somebody attempting to make a nerve agent or chemical weapon that hadn't done it properly. At least with the Skiripals or whatever they were called. With the latest one, I think they were just drug addicts by the sound of it that overdosed, and then, oh, you can blame this on the Russians, distract that Theresa May is a failing Prime Minister. And as of when I'm filming this video, it seems like she's getting a vote of no confidence soon, so I don't think her distraction tactics are working. But anyway, to sum up this video, that is why chemical weapons are probably not used in terrorism. You need to know what you're doing, you need to be able to make them in secret, and you'd need a really good distribution method where people are in a crowded space and they can't easily escape. That's why obviously ramming trucks into people is a much more effective method for terrorists, because there's less planning involved, less chances to get caught beforehand, and vehicles are deadly. But we don't have deadly assault vehicle weapon laws, you know, other than speed limits, I guess, so there's that.